Ancient Egypt was a civilization of ancient northeastern Africa, concentrated along the lower reaches of the Nile River in what is now the modern country of Egypt. Egyptians lived near the Nile as it provided water, food, transportation and excellent, fertile soil for growing food. Ancient Egypt could not have existed without the river Nile. Since rainfall is almost non-existent in Egypt, the floods provided the only source of moisture to sustain crops. Sobek is the god of the Nile River, through that we can notice the huge effect of the Nile River on the ancient Egyptian beliefs. The Egyptians believed that the world and the universe were created out of darkness and swirling chaos. Once there was nothing but endless dark water without form or purpose. Out of this chaos, rose the primordial hill, known as the Ben, upon which stood the great god Atum, or, in some versions of the myth, Ptah. Atum looked upon the nothingness and recognized his alienness, and so he mated with his own shadow to give birth to two children, Shu, god of air, whom Atum spat out, and Phnut, goddess of moisture, whom Atum vomited out. Shu gave to the early world the principles of life, while Phnut contributed the principles of order and that how the universe has been created. Ancient religions are the religions of early civilization. They usually represented as they were dead and gone. Ancient religions were themselves influenced by the earlier religious beliefs and practice of the place where they developed. Ancient religions arose where city living had created the need for new forms of social organization and specialization. Death and funerals. The Egyptians saw death as a transitional stage in the progress to a better life in the next world. They believed they could only reach their full potential after death. Each person was thought to have three souls, the Ka, the Ba, and the Ak. For these to function properly, it was considered essential for the body to survive intact. The entire civilization of ancient Egypt was based on religion, and their beliefs were important to them. Their belief in the rebirth after death became their driving force behind their funeral practices. Embalming. When a person died, the priests recited prayers and a final attempt was made to revive the deceased. The body was then taken to the abet, which was the embalmer's workshop. The body was then packed with a salt called natron for a period of 40 days. After the 40 days had passed, the insides were filled with linen or sawdust, resin and natron. The body was wrapped in bandages with jewelry and amulets between the layers. A portrait mask was placed over the head of the deceased by the chief embalm. The wrapped body, or mummy, was put into a coffin. The embalming was important to the Egyptian people, because they wanted the bodies to be preserved well for the afterlife. It preserves the body for many years and would not decay in its tomb. Burial tombs. After a period of about 70 days, in which the mummification process took place, the mummy was placed in a decorated coffin. Furniture, carved statues, games, food, and other items useful to the next life were prepared to be buried with the mummy. The last ritual performed by the priest on the mummy was called the opening of the mouth. This ceremony was to magically give the deceased the ability to speak and eat again, and to have full use of his body. After placing the mummy in the sarcophagus, the tomb was sealed. Ancient Egyptian had believed in hundreds of gods. Amun, the creator and wind god, was also the ram god of fertility. Amun was one of the most powerful gods in ancient Egypt. At the height of Egyptian civilization he was called the king of the gods. Amun was important throughout the history of ancient Egypt. However, when Amun was combined with the sun god Ra, he was even more powerful. Anubis was the god of the dead and is always pictured in the tombs. He was originally a god of the underworld, but became associated specifically with the embalming process and funeral rites. Anukit was the goddess of the southern city of Aswan and protected the city against evil spirits. He was also a personification of the Nirs, nourisher of the fields. She was also a goddess of the hunt and was worshipped as a protective deity during childbirth. Jilmuthif was the god who guarded the stomach after it was removed in the mummification process. Ours later made them protectors of the four cardinal points, north, south, east and west. In the hall of Marsingal they sat on a lotus flower in front of Osiris. Hapi was the god of the Nile. He allowed the Egyptians to grow crops. Some of the titles of Hapi were, Lord of the Fishes and Birds of the Marshes and Lord of the River bringing vegetation. Rituals. Nobody doubts Egyptian religion was highly ritualistic, involving daily ceremonial activities and regular, popular festivals, or public celebrations with specific dates. Firstly, diurnal rituals. These rituals only happened in the temples. They sing hymns for hours every day. The liturgy, executed for thousands of years in the major temples of Egypt, evidence a constant celebration of life and order thanks to Pharaoh. These ceremonies were created by our priests, Horologois, on their watchtowers, recording the nocturnal sky and projecting their archetypal ideas on the stars and the planets.
Secondly, nocturnal rituals. The Egyptians used to pray every night to their gods, begging their gods to show them the sunlight on the next day. They believed that the sun won't rise on the next day if they don't pray to their gods every night.
Thirdly, monthly observances. Egyptian believed in the cycle of the moon. The Egyptian used to celebrate on the day while the new moon, the beginning of the moon, the first quarter, the full moon, or filling of the eye, and third quarter or 20-day observance. These cycles were dedicated to the mystery of the moon god Osiris. Lastly, festivals and processions. The festivals were ceremonies, a network of rituals, returning every year and intended to keep the order of creation active on earth. Hence, in principle, they were royal rituals in which Pharaoh invoked the deities and re-established his divine rule, affirming his authority and drawing to him all the resources of the two lands. Religion and society. Marriage and the family. Once a young man becomes a teenager, he starts to think about finding his partner and begin his own family. Females were probably thought to be ready for marriage. The male were getting in little age, perhaps 16 to 20 years of age, because they had to become established and be able to support a family. Sex, or any sex between unmarried people, was socially acceptable. Virginity was not important for marriage. Indeed, premarital ones married. However, couples were expected to be sexually faithful to each other. They were highly sensual people, and a major theme of their religion was fertility and procreation. Childbearing and family life. In Egyptian households of all classes, children of both sexes were valued and wanted. In addition to fertility tests, tests for pregnancy and the determination of the gender of the child were devised. The birth of a child was a time of great joy as well as one of serious concern given the high rate of infant mortality and the stress of childbirth on the mother. Childbirth was viewed as a natural phenomenon and not an illness, so assistance in childbirth was usually carried out by a midwife. Dress and fashion. Ancient Egyptians were extremely interested in fashion and its changes. The most common fabric for clothing was linen. Because linen is very hard to dye, most clothes were off-white, so color was added with heavy beaded collars and other jewelry. Also the ancient garment worn by men was a kilt that was made of a rectangular piece of linen cloth wrapped rather loosely around the hips, leaving the knees uncovered. For most of the Pharaonic period, women wore their hair, or wigs, long and straight. After Dynasty 18 hairstyles became more elaborate. During all periods men wore their hair short. Entertainment. Ancient Egyptians had much evidence for the leisure activities of the ancient Egyptians. Men engaged in physical sports, such as hunting, fishing, archery, wrestling, boxing, and stick fencing. One of the most common games was Senet, which was played on a board of 30 squares divided into 3 rows of 10 squares. Like so many other aspects of Egyptian culture, this game had a religious significance, and the game was likened to passing through the underworld. Aspects of the society. Egyptian society had a social hierarchy, with the pharaoh. The pharaoh was a political, religious, and economic leader of the Egyptians. Religiously, the pharaoh was believed to be a god. He was considered a son of Ra, or the incarnation of Horus, son of Osiris. The pyramids were built to ensure the pharaoh's ability to reign in the afterlife. The pharaoh collected a large amount of taxes that he used for large government projects such as building pyramids and temples. Search for meaning. The ancient Egyptian religion helped the believers in every stage of their lives. Their religion mentioned the age of marriage to the male and female. Their religion organized a special time for praying which helped them out with their lives, because that made them get closer to their God as well they can live their own live. Their religion inspired them to build the pyramids, which are now a souvenir for their culture. Their religion organized their diet, which that helped them out to live a healthy life. Moreover, hundreds of others wrote that their religion was proved to them to live a better life and find the meaning of their life.